Thomas Edison, Richard Branson, John F. Kennedy, Mozart, Michael Jordan, Will Smith. That sounds like a list of highly successful titans in a variety of vocations. Why is it that we rarely hear that they have or had ADHD? And you know what we hear even less about? Serena Williams, Emma Watson, Mel Robbins, Whoopi Goldberg, Agatha Christie, Erin Brockovich, Cher. Yeah, the successful women navigating ADHD. And that's exactly why I started this podcast, ADHD for Smartass Women. I'm your host, Tracy Otsuka. I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, a lifelong student, now a coach. I'm also the creator of Your ADHD Brain is A-OK, a system that helps people like you figure out what they should do with their life. And we're here today to talk ADHD, your strengths, your symptoms, your workarounds, and how you proudly stand out instead of trying to fit in. I credit my ADHD for some of my greatest gifts. And you know what? I spy a happier life for you too. So without further ado, a shiny new episode is starting now. Hello, I am Tracy Otsuka, and I want to welcome you to episode 106 of ADHD for Smartass Women. So we have two guest rules on this podcast. First rule, you have to have ADHD. The second rule is I only interview women. After all, our podcast is called ADHD for Smartass Women, and there's so much out there already for boys and men. All that said, I am going to break rule number 2 today, and I think you're going to agree that it's for a very good reason. In this episode, I am going to introduce you to the one and only Dr. Edward Hallowell. If you know anything at all about ADHD, you know his name as the leading authority in the field of ADHD. Dr. Hallowell is a board-certified child and adult psychiatrist, a New York Times bestselling author. He, along with Dr. John Ratey, wrote what I consider to be the Bible of ADHD, Driven to Distraction. Now retired from the faculty of Harvard Medical School, Dr. Hallowell has been featured on 2020, 60 Minutes, Oprah, PBS, CNN, Today, Good Morning America, and in the New York Times, US Today, Newsweek, Time. I could go on, but I really had to truncate that list. He is a regular columnist for ADDitude magazine and is also the host of his weekly podcast called Distraction. Dr. Hallowell is the founder of the Hallowell Centers in Boston, New York City, San Francisco, Palo Alto, and Seattle. He lives in the Boston area with his wife and their 3 grown children. Welcome, Dr. Hallowell.
Thank you so much for that introduction, Tracy. It makes me feel humbled.
Well, I was wondering about that. Well, first of all, did I get it all right?
Yes. Remarkably, you did. Often people don't get it right, and you did. For someone who has ADHD, that's also impressive, such attention to detail.
Only when I speak. So,
and I do qualify for your first requirement to be on your show. I do have ADHD and throw in dyslexia as an added benefit.
I know that. It's why I wanted you here especially. So when you hear all that, are you ever incredulous, or are you kind of like, yeah, I knew that would happen all along?
Oh my gosh, I'm so incredulous. In fact, I still have, I'm 70. I just turned 71, which I can't believe.
Happy birthday.
But I still have a bit of what so many people with ADHD have, which is an imposter syndrome. I think, did I write all those books? I know I did, because the other day for a publicity photograph, I stacked them all up and held them in my arms, and they're there. And I sort of looked at them as if I'd begat 21 children. And I said, each one of you came from me, didn't you? And they all looked up at me and said, yes, we did. and this is a condition that is so full of paradoxes, so full of, on the one hand, I've written these 21 books, and that's wonderful. But on the other hand, I can't quite believe I did it, and because I'm just so accustomed to finding things in life difficult, but then magic happens and wonderful things happen. And that, I think that's a real common theme in life with ADHD, the discovering that you can do things that you hadn't known you could over and over and over again.
That is so encouraging, because I know that I can certainly relate, and I know that my women can also relate to that. So before I start peppering you with all kinds of questions about the book, because I just loved it so much.
Oh, thank you.
I just want you to know how personally grateful I am for you and your work. You know, like many mothers, you've probably heard this story a million times. I had no idea what ADHD was when my son Marcus was diagnosed at 12. And I really thought it meant you were stupid. It meant you were slow.
Yes.
And so I hired a local psychologist who was supposedly an expert in ADHD because I wanted to learn more.
Yeah.
And she met with my son Marcus. And then she told my husband and me that privately, thank God, that he was far too, well, now he knows that he was far too ambitious for his own good. Oh. And our job as his parents was to reduce his expectations so he wouldn't be disappointed in life.
Oh, that just makes my hair hurt when I hear these kinds of, I hear them all the time, as I'm sure you do too. Yeah.
Then I thought, okay, well, I got rid of her because I just knew, you know, I'm a eternal optimist. I make lemonade out of lemons. And I just knew there was a different way.
Yeah.
But even when I went to the literature on ADHD, I bought the books. It was so doom and gloom. And it wasn't until I found Driven to Distraction and your strength-based approach. Well, you know what? Honestly, what gave me the most hope was learning that both you and Dr. Ratey have ADHD.
Yeah, exactly.
And I remember thinking, these are Harvard professors. I knew it. You can be wildly successful, not despite ADHD, but maybe because of it.
Yes.
So I just wanted to say thank you so much. My son is now a freshman in his first semester at NYU Tisch during COVID.
Excellent. And, bravo.
So happy. And he did so well. And that was after 3 high schools in 4 years. So
there you go.
You changed his life. You changed my life because then I was diagnosed.
Excellent.
And you've also given me my purpose because now I get to change other women's lives. And I feel honored to be able to tell you this in person. So thank you.
Well, listen, I feel honored to hear it from you because, you know, you're the biggest undiagnosed group are adult women. And you're carrying on a campaign that it's to liberate people, men and women, adults and children, but your target is adult women, and to liberate them from the shackles that they have been clamped into for hundreds of years. I mean, you know, all the negative labels, loser, stupid, lazy, you know, morally deficient, blah, 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 blah. And to be able to come along like this marvelous fairy godmother and wave your wand and have those shackles break and have these wonderful women rise up from their, you know, enslavement and lay claim to the wonderful life they can have. Now, it doesn't happen overnight, but you're helping them. You're saying, look, these are mind-forged manacles. You know, there's society-forged, but they're also mind-forged. And to break them, the starting point is to know that they're made of nothing but what you can destroy. And the possibilities are limitless. You know, I don't mean to say it's not difficult. It is difficult. I tell folks I don't treat disabilities. I help people unwrap their gifts. But unwrapping these gifts is not as easy as unwrapping a present under the Christmas tree where you just tear it open. You know, it can take an awful lot of time. But gosh, how much better you feel if you're saying to yourself, I'm unwrapping my gift as opposed to I'm treating my deficit disorder. You know, I mean, you know, it's just such a difference.
Absolutely. Thank you. Before we get into your new book, the first question I ask every guest on this podcast is this one, and I'd love to hear your story. Tell me the circumstances around your own personal ADHD diagnoses.
It's just, now, did you say what number podcast is this? So you've asked this question
106.
So I'm the 106th person guest.
Yes.
Wow, you must have collected quite a number of anecdotes. My own discovery of this condition was one of the great, and that's the question, right? How did I find out about it?
Yeah.
Yeah. It was one of the great aha moments of my life. Here I'd gone through all my schooling. I knew all along that I had trouble reading. And in first grade, I was just called a slow reader. And I'll tell you that story as well. So I knew I had what's now called dyslexia. And by the way, I ended up majoring in English at Harvard College while doing pre-med and graduating with high honors. Now I've written 21 books. So you can hardly say the dyslexia impaired me with words. I mean, again, another paradox. I'm an incredibly slow reader. My wife says, I don't know how you know anything. It takes me so long to read. But I'm able to do quite a lot with it. So again, the paradox, impaired but gifted. And you see that over and over again. So here I am. I've gone through school, high school, college, medical school. I'm doing a residency in psychiatry at a Harvard training program. Then I am doing a fellowship in child psychiatry. And in July of 1981, one of the first lectures I heard at the start of this fellowship in child psychiatry was by a neurologist, the name of Elsie Freeman, a woman, fittingly enough for our theme today, who proceeded to describe this condition that was then called attention deficit disorder. The H was not added in yet. And as she described it, going from the diagnostic manual, all the negative symptoms, I could see into that the description fit me to a T, only she was leaving out all the good parts. So it was this massive epiphany, revelation, call it what you will, but in that half hour, probably the most transformative, other than meeting my wife for the first time or having our babies, the most transformative, intellectually mind-changing half hour of my life, because I could see it. I could see it all right there in July, Boston, 1981, sun coming in through the windows, and I could see this dazzling vision. Boy, this thing is so much more important than most people know, because it was like no big deal. ADD, that nobody'd ever heard of it. It was a disability that children had, and, stupid children at that, and a bunch of pain in the neck little boys running around getting into trouble. They just needed a spanking. They didn't need a diagnosis. And it was just so thoroughly misunderstood, but I could see right then. And it's been the story of my career, expanding on that epiphany, expanding on that little grain that the wonderful Elsie Freeman, she didn't know what she was doing. She didn't know she was passing along to me so much more than the content of her lecture. But so that's how I found out about it. And, people often poo-poo sort of stories of revelation, but it was on a par with when I was 10 years old, I heard a voice in my head saying, you should become a psychiatrist. That's another story. That's also a true story. But that was just a moment. That was but this was a lecture and a process of revelation and discovery that's been continuing ever since. I'm still learning about this condition, still learning how to manage it and tell others about it and spread the good news. I see this as good news. The bad news is when you don't know about it. The bad news is when you have a professional who's steering you wrong, like you encountered, saying, "Oh, well, give up. You're nothing but a loser. You might as well, work on the rock pile for the rest of your life." When you discover that you have hidden talents that don't necessarily unwrap themselves, that school often doesn't notice and certainly doesn't do anything to encourage. When you get that information, that's really good news, because your life can only get better, whether you get it at 6 years old or 60 years old. My oldest patient was 86, and the treatment changed his life. He was able to write the book he'd wanted to write his whole life long. So it's a long answer to your question, but that's how I found out about it. And I've been lucky enough to have been working with people who have it ever since. I'm the happiest doctor. I'm the happiest doctor you'll ever find because I just deliver good news.
Yeah. But this was 1981. I
Right.
would think that everything that Elsie was talking about was negative. And how did you make this connection that that was you when here you are, a Harvard educated doctor?
First of all, I'm really impressed that you remembered her name was Elsie because I only mentioned it once. And the
I wrote
fact,
it down.
well, good for you. Good for you. But I'm very impressed with that. You are one smart cookie. Anyway, yeah, she was only talking about the negative, the deficit disorder. But I could see between the lines. I could see, impulsivity was one of the cardinal symptoms. And, it occurred to me right then and there, what is creativity but impulsivity gone right? Because you don't plan to have a creative idea. You don't say it's 2:00, time for my creative idea and lay it like an egg. No, no, creative ideas pop. They come unbidden, unplanned, in the shower in the morning, falling asleep at night, stuck in traffic, whatever, in the middle of a kiss, suddenly, oh my God, I just thought of this. And the person you're kissing says, what happened? And you say, I just had a new idea. So it's impulsive. It's impulsive. That's the upside of impulsivity is creativity. The downside is making wacko decisions and shooting from the hip and, leaping before you look. So like everything in this strange, misunderstood condition, there's a positive side and a negative side. There's always the flips of the upside and the downside. And the same thing with distractibility, when she was talking, oh, these people are so distractible, blah, blah, blah. Well, I ask you, what is curiosity but a form of distractibility? If you didn't care what was going on outside, you wouldn't look away from what you're doing to find out. If you didn't care what was going on in that petri dish, you wouldn't notice that it wasn't the same as when you left it, and you wouldn't discover penicillin. So, we can be drawn off track, but often that's a wonderful thing. Now, sometimes it's not, and you miss what's going on in the classroom and you fail the test. So, like I say, like everything in this condition, there's a positive side and the negative side. But yeah, it was a blessing, and that I was able to sort of see that the medical model, the deficit disorder model, really only told half the story. An important part of the story, to be sure. You need to work on the downside. But my job as a doctor working with people who have this is to maximize the upside and minimize the damage done by the downside. And there's always some negative parts to it, and then often the positive parts the person is not aware of. And when I turn them on to that, women, I mean, so many women come in and they had been diagnosed with depression and anxiety, which is almost invariably what happens to a woman who has ADHD. If she happens to go for help, the doctor will say, well, you're depressed and anxious, and here's an SSRI. See you later. When I'm meeting with them and I start talking to them about their aspirations, and they sort of look down at the floor, well, I at one point wanted to start a business, but I know I can't do that. I'm too disorganized and flighty and too anxious and too depressed, and I'm not smart enough. And then I say, the fact is, you're extremely smart. And they look up at me because they're used to being BS'd, and they sort of eyes narrow and they say, how do you know that? You don't know me well enough. I say, well, I do. Your vocabulary, your appreciation of irony, even your ability to challenge me and ask me, how do I know that? Those are all indicators of high intelligence, and you're very smart. And then the tears will start coming down her cheeks because she's known all along she's very smart, but just nobody recognized it. So she pushed it aside and said, well, maybe they're all right. Maybe I'm not very smart. But when I come along and offer just a little bit of proof that she is, in fact, very smart, it activates that part of her that has known all along that she's smart, but has given up on it. And all of a sudden, she starts sitting up straighter, sparkle comes into her eyes, the tears subside, and we begin to talk about, the places she'll go to, the wonders she'll see. And this is not, Hallmark baloney. This is real. I've seen this in my office thousands of times. And women particularly get overlooked because they're not disruptive. They're not hyperactive. In a classroom, they didn't get into trouble. They're the girl who sat in the back of the room staring out the window, twisting their hair in their finger, looking at the specks of dust in the shaft of light coming in through the window and thinking long thoughts that have nothing to do with what's going on in the room. But they get overlooked and they're dismissed as maybe not that bright or maybe not that motivated or sort of dull. And that's the sad part, because that begins to get woven into your self-esteem system. And that's why it's so important that women become aware of this diagnosis, that you don't have to be a history of being disruptive or hyperactive, just the opposite. You can be the quiet daydreamer, what I call the Emily Dickinson kind of ADD. Emily Dickinson, for listeners who don't know it, she's probably America's greatest poet. And she lived a quiet life in Amherst, Massachusetts. But boy, oh boy, was her mind going a mile a minute. And that's often the way it is for these women, whether they're, again, 6 years old or 9 years old, which is what my daughter was when she was diagnosed, or 29 or 39 or 49. It's never too late to get the diagnosis. And if any of you are listening and hearing yourself in some of this, that's great news. That's great news. Don't let the negative thoughts swim in and undercut you. Don't let them saying, oh, well, it's not me, or I'm not that smart, or it's too late for me and I can't do it and people will laugh at me. No. Don't let those negative thoughts circle you. Don't let those negative thoughts demotivate you or discourage you. That's why what you're doing, Tracy, is so wonderful, offering this podcast where people can get accurate information, but also encouraging information. Because, like I said earlier, this is a good news diagnosis. The bad news is when you don't know about it.
Yeah. So this is a perfect segue for this question I have had for a long time now. So as I understand it, ADHD symptoms exist on a spectrum or a continuum, and that's also true for intelligence. So you can have some people with very high intelligence with ADHD and some people supposedly not so much. But I feel at this point, I've met thousands of ADHD women. And my observation is that every single one of them seems truly brilliant at something. Am I wrong? Is it just that I'm attracting a certain kind of woman with ADHD, or what have you seen?
No, I think you're absolutely right. And that's what's so misleading about the word smart. Smart, you immediately have to ask, smart at what? Smart means nothing standing by itself. No one is smart at everything. People who are smart at math are stupid at fielding ground balls, say. And remember, all the range of human skills and capabilities goes well beyond a classroom. But yes, that's why I say to folks all the time, having this condition is a marker of talent. And it's my job to locate that talent, because a lot of times the adults who come to see me, particularly the women, I'll say, what are you good at? They'll say, nothing. I'm not good at anything. One of my patients said, her father used to say to her, you have no more sense than a jaybird. And that got into her, and that defined her in her own eyes. And this woman was absolutely brilliant. She just wouldn't hear it because she hadn't gotten good grades in the sciences and math in school. So she wasn't particularly smart at science and math, but she was a gifted artist, a gifted writer, and more than that, gifted interpersonally. She could make anyone smile. She could draw out anyone's story. I mean, these are all forms of intelligence. So I completely agree with you. It's just our job, those of us who work with these folks, to help them discover the areas of smartness, quote unquote, that they have buried, overlooked, or forgotten.
Completely. And it's so much fun to do that. And I think you're so right. It's not that difficult.
No.
And it happens pretty darn quickly.
Exactly. It's like picking low-hanging fruit.
Yeah. Okay. So over the holiday, I read the new book that you've just written with Dr. Ratey, ADHD 2.0, New Science and Essential Strategies for Thriving with Distraction. Now, I believe it's available tomorrow, Tuesday, January 12th. Is that true?
Yeah, tomorrow is the publication date, but it can be ordered today.
Perfect. Okay. So I just want you to know, as I said before, I absolutely loved it. It was really clear to me that ADHD 2.0 was actually written for an ADHD brain.
Yes.
So many times I will pick up a book about ADHD and I'll just know it was written by someone who doesn't really know what an ADHD brain feels like because it's 300 pages long. It's in 9-point type and there's these ridiculous 1-page paragraphs.
Yep. Tracy, if I can interrupt you, because you're putting your finger on something that distinguishes this book among all my other books. This is only 50,000 words. It is the shortest book I've written by far. And the book I handed in was 125,000 words. And the editor said, this is just too long for people with ADHD. So we proceeded to cut more than half of the book. And it was painful for me, but I'm so grateful to her because what you hold in your hand is just meat, no fat, and someone with ADHD can read it pretty quickly. And I'm so glad to hear you say that it is ADD friendly.
Read it in a weekend, and that was just a couple hours each day.
Mm-hmm.
I loved it. It was easy to read. It got to the point quickly and simply.
Mm-hmm.
The science was presented in an understandable way, and my favorite part of all the books you write is it's full of optimism, hope, and positive emotion. So I will tell you, it is now my number one ADHD book recommendation. I feel like you literally wrote this book for those of us over here, smart-ass women with ADHD.
Oh, I did. You know, the epigram to the book comes from a little children's story I wrote for my daughter when she was diagnosed at age 9. And it goes, no brain is the same. No brain is the best. Each brain finds its own special way. And that's sort of the life adventure that we're all on, ADHD or not.
Right. So tell me why this book, why now? Because you've written a lot of books about ADHD.
Right. Well, it had been since 2005, our last ADHD book came out. So it had been, Driven to Distraction was 1994. Mm-hmm. And then Delivered from Distraction was 2005. So this is, 15 years later. And a lot's happened in those 15 years in the field. And we also wanted to really consolidate in very plain terms the strength-based approach and give the condition a new name. Because deficit disorder does horrible injustice. It's not a deficit of attention. It's an abundance of attention that we have. Our challenge is to control it. And I don't see it as a disorder. I see it as a trait. Can it be a disorder? Yes, it can. But can it be an asset? Yes, indeed it can. So we offer up as an alternative term, and I have no illusion that it'll be adopted by the DSM, but we offer it up as an alternative term for you to use in describing yourself. The acronym is VAST, and it is a vast terrain, but it stands for Variable Attention Stimulus Trait. And attention and stimulus are sort of the two key elements to this condition, and they're variable. That's a third key element. And then it's a trait rather than a disorder. And if you manage it properly, it can become predominantly an asset. There's always going to be some downside to it, but you can minimize the downside and maximize the upside. And it gives you reason to celebrate. I'm part of a documentary that's being made by Nancy Armstrong and her husband, Tim. Tim is the former CEO of AOL Yahoo, and he's got big time ADHD, and so does his son. And they are personally funding this documentary that's based on the strength-based approach. And we profile just a slew of very well-known celebrities that everyone will recognize. And they're all saying, I have it, I have it, I have it, I have it. And then we walk along some prospective patients that we started with de novo and took them from diagnosis through treatment. So we follow them for a year. And our hope is that this will really go a long way toward undoing stigma. So we have ADHD 2.0 coming out tomorrow, and then the documentary coming out in early March. And we hope that'll be a 1-2 punch to to really knock the stuffing out of the deficit disorder model. But don't get me wrong, I'm not saying there isn't a downside to this. There's a terrible downside. It can, undealt with, ruin your life. People with this condition can, just live a life of horrible underachievement or miserable failure, or at its worst, it's the prison population or the addicted population or the unemployed, the marginalized, the alienated. So the suicide, depression, all that is higher in the world of this condition. But the part that is accurate, truthful, and so hopeful is if you get a handle on it, if you learn how to ride this bucking bronco, you can win races. There's a Nobel Prize in this age of COVID. The best test for COVID is called the PCR test, and that stands for the polymerase chain reaction. And the man who discovered that, Kary Mullis, who's now passed away, won the Nobel Prize, and he had flaming ADHD. He used to go take penguins to the beach in California, and he used to just do a wildly eccentric guy and absolutely brilliant. And that's, you see that. And that's why it's such a shame for people to feel like they have to try to force themselves to be Joe or Jill normal. We're just not Joe or Jill normal. And we need to be confident enough or get enough support from folks like you to say, gosh, I don't care if I act like the neighbor, if I act like the Joneses, because that's not me. Nothing against my neighbor or the Joneses, but I want to talk to penguins, or I want to, eat my dinner under my bed, or, whatever odd habit you might happen to have. There's nothing wrong with it. As long as you don't hurt people, anything goes. And so
the Joneses are boring as hell anyway.
Right, exactly. And boredom is our kryptonite. We just don't do boredom. We are, the minute boredom sets in, we're off to something else, if not physically, then mentally.
So in treating ADHD, why do you think it is that focusing on strengths has been ignored for so long? I mean, you've been shouting about it, but many other experts aren't.
Well, I think part of the reason is it comes out of the medical model, and medicine is all about pathology. You don't go to the doctor because you feel so good. You don't say, "Oh, I feel great today, I think I'll call my doctor." You go to the doctor when you feel bad, and so medicine is all about pathology. And then the other reason is no one's going to fund research into an asset. Nobody's, so if you want to get research money, you've got to play up how damaging the condition can be. And that's the point my wonderful colleague Russ Barkley makes. He says, Neb, will you please stop talking about the positives, because we're not going to get any research money. Nobody's going to fund research into a gift or an asset, And he makes a good point. So I think those are two reasons. The medical tradition is pathology, and in order to get research money, you've got to prove that this can be, disabling, and it can be. It's not hard to prove. Russ has done a very good job of that, but I'm just saying that's not the whole story, and the rest of the story needs to be told. So parents don't think, they've been given a lower your ambition sentence for their children, and these women, your audience, can say, there's a darn good chance I've got a lot more in me than I've unwrapped. There's a darn good chance that I can fly, that I can be the person I envisioned when I was a little girl daydreaming in 5th grade. That the only thing that stands between me and that is how I feel about myself and about possibility. Now, you can't snap your fingers, no, but that's another quality among us ADDers. We're tenacious. We don't give up. We just don't give up. And you knock us down 10 times, we'll get up 11. And it's a wonderful quality. It's an amazing quality. But so many folks with ADD who don't know they have it are driving on square wheels. Well, it's hard to get very far on square wheels, where they keep putting in the effort, trying, and just getting the shopping done, the housework done, the kids dressed, the kids off to school. It's Herculean how much effort they have to put in. And then if they happen to have a career as well, it's mind-boggling, but they manage to get it done. But, the message I want them to know is, look, get the right help, get the right coach, get the right strategies, get the right medication if that applies, your life can change. And that's another issue that medication has such a negative press. Used properly, stimulant medication is a godsend. Used properly, it can be as life-changing as eyeglasses. Is it the whole treatment? No, it's never the whole treatment. Education should always be part of the treatment. Coaching, lifestyle changes, marry the right person, find the right job, obvious stuff like that. And a lot of people with ADD are stuck in the wrong relationship or stuck in the wrong job or both. So there's a lot more to it than just taking medication. But if medication works for you, and it works for about 80% of people, then it can make all the other non-medication interventions so much easier to enact.
There are two acronyms that you use, two new acronyms in ADHD 2.0. I hadn't heard of them before.
Mm-hmm.
One of them is TPN and one of them is DMN. Can you explain how these two networks interact and how we can use them, possibly to benefit our ADHD brains?
Absolutely. When you said TPN, my immediate, this is the deep centers of the brain. Before I went to medical school, I did research in nutrition, surgical patients at the old Boston City Hospital, and a lot of them were on what's called total parenteral nutrition, TPN. But that's not the TPN I talk about in the book. Don't worry, this is not a book
I don't think so.
about surgical patients dying of malnutrition. TPN, the brain has, and this is wonderful new research from functional magnetic resonance imaging. When you're doing a task, when you're frying an egg, when you're doing a crossword, when you're talking to another person like we're talking, different regions of your brain light up, 4 different regions. And in aggregate, it's called a connectome. And the name of that connectome is the task positive network, the TPN. And your imagination is firing and you're creating, you're building, whether it's frying or conversing or constructing or planning or painting, whatever it might happen to be. Your imagination is engaged in a way that's constructive and positive and building. Well, when the task is finished, when the egg is fried, when the crossword is done, when we're finished our conversation, the TPN shuts down. The elements of that connectome go dark. The old thought was the brain kind of takes a rest, like we all do when we're finished a task. Well, not the brain. No, in fact, when the TPN shuts down, the brain becomes more active than it had been before, as measured by glucose consumption and oxygen
Is that everyone's brain or just the ADHD?
Yes, everyone's brain. But then what lights up is called the default mode network, the DMN or the demon, and I'll explain why. Now, in people with ADD and in some others who have this trait, what happens is that the imagination starts feeding negative stuff. The DMN starts this stream of sludge of I suck, life sucks, nothing's going to work out, you're stupid, you're ugly, you're a failure, your dreams are over, kiss happiness goodbye, your marriage is over, your husband is stupid, your kids are ugly, you're ugly. Just the litany of really bad stuff about yourself, about your life. And it just keeps on this ruminative, brooding, negative state. And the person fixates on it. And why do they do that? Well, we like stimulation, we ADDers. And contentment is too bland. You don't say she was riveted in contentment. But you do say she was riveted in self-loathing, in fear, anxiety, self-hatred, doom and gloom. That's riveting. It's horrible. It's punishing. It's torturous, but it's riveting. And so you sit there feeding the demon, feeding the DMN with your attention. And the solution is not medication. It's not psychotherapy. It is simply don't feed the demon. Don't give it your attention. Cut off its oxygen supply, which is your attention. And as riveting as it is, it's like irresistible, like looking at the accident you pass on the highway. Well, do what happens on the highway. Drive past it. Stop feeding the demon. Don't give it your attention. So do something else. Do something else. Dig a hole. Call a friend. Jump up and down. Do 25 jumping jacks. Focus on your breathing. As long as you engage your attention in some other task that is interesting enough to take your imagination away from the negative, then you've foiled the demon.
So it's all about action?
Yes. And don't mistake the creations of the demon for truth. That's what a lot of people do. This, oh yeah, you're right. I really am a total loser, and I'm brave enough to face it, and I'll face it down and accept my horrible fate. It's your imagination. It's a disease of the imagination. And again, another paradox. I've talked, this is a condition of endless paradoxes. When you're in the TPN, Task Positive Network, what your greatest asset is, your greatest strength, your unique ability is your imagination. Well, when the DMN lights up, your greatest asset becomes your worst enemy, your imagination. And it conjures up all the horribleness that, any creative person's imagination can conjure up. This has been one of the most tenacious problems that my patients bring to me. And one of the major reasons for writing this book was we really wanted to get the word out that you don't turn to medication to control this. And don't try to argue it out with psychotherapy, because you can't. The DMN always wins. What you have to do is the simplest thing in the world, is shut off your attention to it. It's hard to do. It's simple, but hard, because it's very seductive. The DMN is very seductive. There's no better way to get someone's attention than to tell them they're stupid, ugly, and boring. Oh, yeah, you're right. I really am. I'm a total loser. Particularly people with ADD, we are so ready to condemn ourselves, and so ready. And it's just don't do it. Don't do it. Don't feed the negative version of who you are with your attention, because it only lets it grow. Tell it to shut the bleep up and get on to something else, doing jumping jacks, take a shower, call a friend, slap your face, something that will snap you out of it. The old ancient puritanical wisdom of a cold shower and a run around the block is in fact a very good idea. If you can get yourself to do that. And, it sounds so simple, but it's profoundly helpful. And of all the assets in this new book, it's one of the most practically useful. If you can just get yourself to do it, don't feed the demon. There are a few aphorisms I really, really, really love, and that's one of them. Once you understand what the demon is, don't feed the DMN. Don't give the demon your attention. Another one, by the way, is never worry alone.
I love that one.
Yeah. It's so important. Just never, ever worry alone. And, bad stuff happens when you're worrying alone.
So why is that so important, specifically for our ADHD brains, not to worry alone?
Because when you worry alone, the demon gets activated. Your imagination starts going toward the negative. And, in isolation, that's when bad things happen. The demon gets activated. You're worrying alone. The demon just loves it. You're alone. And it's like a vulture. It swoops in and just picks away at your carcass. But when you get someone else in the process, suddenly that worrying turns into problem solving. A good analogy illustration is, imagine yourself in a dark warehouse, huge warehouse, alone. You get paranoid, you get terrified. But if you're in that dark warehouse with someone, you laugh. You don't feel scared at all. And you immediately start brainstorming, how do we get out of here? How do we turn on a light? Do you have a match? What have you? But when you're in that dark warehouse alone, then you envision every terrible outcome, and you get down on the floor and take the fetal position. That's what worrying alone does to us, particularly imaginative people, which is the ADD population. We are cursed and blessed with an amazing imagination. And my job is to help people turn that imagination into more of a asset than a liability.
That makes perfect sense. Even just being alone in the dark, sometimes
Yes.
my brain just goes off. And I've always been like that. And I think, do normal people think about these things? Like, I have to run for the light because I'm imagining all these things.
That's the price you pay for having such an imagination.
Oh,
No, adult people don't. It's why worriers. I'm a big worrier. I wrote a book about worry because I'm a big worrier. I think people who worry a lot, it's also a sign of talent because it takes a lot of smarts and creativity to dream up all the crap we worry about. Not very smart or creative people don't worry so much because they can't think of all the things that could go wrong.
wow. So about a year ago, I did a poll in our Facebook group because I just had this sense. And I asked our women, do you feel that you have more of a need to live to your full potential and make a difference than your neurotypical friends? And it was a small survey. I mean, we have 22,000 women, maybe more than that in the group, and only 119 women responded, but 119 said yes, and only 4 said no. I have noticed in my practice, however, that we have a lot of women, they're midlife, empty nesters, and they're always working on that second or third act. We don't retire. We don't ride off into the sunset. They always seem to be like learning and collecting degrees and wanting to know more about themselves. Has that been your observation about ADHD people as well?
Absolutely. And I think there's a reason for it. And it's not that we're so ambitious. It's that we have this imperative to grow things, to nurture things, to build things. In fact, I have a chapter in the book called Find the Right Difficult. If we're not creating something, we're not happy. I mean, the reason I write so many books, it's not that I'm ambitious to write a lot of books. If I don't have a book going, I get depressed. Someone else, if they don't have a business they're growing, they get depressed. If they don't have a degree they're pursuing, they get depressed. It's not about, ambition so much as it is an internal need, an absolute need to create. And another reason is ordinary life just doesn't do it for us. Our baseline pleasure is set lower than other people. This is a reason for addiction, by the way, as well. But in order to feel good about being alive, we need to pump up the volume. We need to create more intensity. Well, one wonderfully adaptive way of doing that is to have a creative outlet, to write a book, to start a business, to plant a garden, and then you get the wonderful effect of doing that, and it really makes us feel good. That's what I mean by find the right difficult. Now, you can't just pick anything that's difficult, learning Chinese or something, but it's got to be a creative activity that both matters to you and is challenging. For me, it's writing, and I discovered it in 12th grade, and I've been doing it ever since. For someone else, it might be knitting, or it might be, a bench scientist. It might be whatever, but find your right difficult. Find something that you can just invest in that will challenge you, that you'll never master completely, that it'll be endlessly frustrating, like writing is for me. But it's endlessly frustrating in a very rewarding way. And that's another paradox, but it's true. And we need to have that expression. We're like cows. We need to be milked. We need to be milked. And, if we don't get milked, we don't feel right. I came up with that analogy from John Milton, the poet who wrote Paradise Lost. And at the end of his life, he was blind. And so he would compose in his mind. He was such a genius. He just composed it in his mind overnight, the next, 100 verses of Paradise Lost. And in the morning, he would call his daughters and he would say, "I need my milking." And so they would come and write down what he had composed in his mind overnight. And I think we as a group, we need our milking, and we need to find the right difficult, because a lot of people with this condition spend their whole lives trying to get good at what they're bad at. And, for women, the women who just are never going to be good at housework, Forget it. The goal
Too
is not
smart.
what the goal is
You're
not
too smart for housework to me.
No, the goal is not to have a perfect house. It's to have a house that's well enough organized that you can live in it,
Yeah.
And so, or a pocketbook that's well enough organized that you can find something when you need it. That's a far cry from being Martha Stewart. Give yourself a break, and if you're not the world's greatest cook, so what? Order out. Don't spend your life trying to get good at what you think society wants you to be good at. Follow your own talents and develop them. Get better at what you're good at. When you're a kid, you have to try to get good at everything because you're just learning. But if you're an adult, just develop your talents and hire out, delegate, whatever, the stuff that you don't do well.
So much of that, though, is socialized, right? We have the sense if we're women, these are the kinds of things we're supposed to be responsible for. And if we're responsible, we need to do them well. But you're absolutely right. It's BS.
My wife is mastering that. My wife, I'm 71 and she's 65. And I think she's now gotten to the place where she really doesn't care if the house doesn't look like it's all perfect. It's taken her 30 years to get there, but
Absolutely. So before I let you go, I have to ask you a couple questions that my women in my group asked, if I may.
Yes.
So Megan M. asked, she said, as a medical student, I'm interested to know where Dr. Hallowell sees the field of ADHD research and treatment going.
Oh, I think it's all going to head toward the strength-based approach for sure. And the non-medication interventions, like in the book, I talk about cerebellar stimulation. I think that's one of the most promising. So I think those two areas, and destigmatizing, the whole, I want people by the time I die to wish they had ADHD.
Right.
And
run to their doctor to get the diagnosis.
Exactly. And come out skipping because at last they've been validated and they can contribute to the world what they know they have it in them to contribute. And then I think we're going to find more and more non-medication, whether it's exercise or nutrition or brain waves or, more targeted, doable interventions. I think the day will come when medication is obsolete, but we're not there yet. And don't fear medication. If you use it properly, like I said earlier, it's a godsend.
Thank you. So Kelsey asks, do you have any thought on the relationship between introversion, extroversion, and ADHD types? Do notable inattentive ADHDers tend to be introverted rather than extroverted?
In my experience, yes, but I have never tested that out. So what I'm saying may be complete baloney. But in my experience, yes. Now, I, contrary to what most people would think, am an intense introvert, and I am, inattentive ADHD. I've learned to compensate my introversion by being able to behave like an extrovert, which I need to do in my work. But I love nothing more than curling up in bed and watching TV and letting the world disappear. So it is in my experience that inattentive and introversion go hand in hand.
Okay, so Dr. Hallowell, our Facebook group is called ADHD for Smartass Women. So you are not going to escape without a question about women and hormones.
Yes.
Apparently, and remember, I'm a lawyer, not a doctor, so I may get this a little bit off, but if we simplify it, is it true that where our hormones are affects our estrogen levels, which affects then dopamine, which in turn affects our ADHD symptoms from, I guess, adolescence on through our lifespan? But there are still so few studies on women and hormones and ADHD, or the few studies that are out there are so small. And I think the thing that surprised me the most was that women generally, we haven't been included in ADHD studies because it's my understanding our hormone levels aren't static, which ultimately means that our symptoms aren't either. So it mucks up the ADHD studies. Is that true?
Yeah, I think it is. And we really do need more studies. In fact, I'm thinking about doing one myself. I think we will get to the time where we adjust medication throughout the month based on your menstrual cycle. and that we add estrogen for women in menopause as a standard part of prescribing stimulants. That, I think there's a much more than for men. There's this menstrual variability, and as well as the need for exogenous estrogen if you're in menopause. And I think a lot of so-called medication failures, it's not that the stimulants didn't work, it's that they needed the extra estrogen.
Got it.
But you're right, it's a big topic. I have a close friend who's been working with, she's the woman, I don't know if you know, but I'm on TikTok and
I have to tell you, your TikTok is fantastic.
Oh, thank you so much.
I was having trouble with the TPN and the double. I was really having trouble understanding that, even after I read your book. And I thought, well, I could go back and do that again, or I could go look on his TikTok. And you have it described in the TikTok. Yeah. And you make it so simple. It was basically go dig a hole or fry an egg. You're acting. So it's fantastic. So I'm sorry, I interrupted you.
No. Thank you. I'm so glad that you're related to the TikToks. Yeah, they've had over 5 million views. It's been amazing. But I think the format fits, the 60-second clips. Yeah. But anyway, the woman who has helped me do that is the one who really turned me on to this women hormones and whatnot, because she's gone through menopause and she's found that her stimulants work much better when she gets an estrogen supplementation. So, and she's saying we ought to do a study. So remember, there are people for whom no medication works, like me. My medication is caffeine. And the thing that I think is probably most important of all, the other vitamin C, Vitamin Connect. Yes. And, your Facebook community, that's fantastic what you're doing. Your women, tell them just by being a member of that and feeling that community, they are extending their lives. They're raising their performance level. It's so good. I think it's the most important thing in life is connection. And what drives most of the problems in life is disconnection. Of course, during COVID, it's made it more difficult, but it's not impossible. What we're doing, you and I feel like we've gotten to know each other. We haven't seen each other. We're just talking, but we're connecting.
Absolutely. Well, I just can't thank you enough for spending time with us here today. It was truly an honor and a privilege.
Well, the honor and privilege was all mine, and I can't thank you enough, and your listeners and your readers, Tracy. Thank you.
Thank you.
This episode of ADHD for Smartass Women was brought to you by Your ADHD Brain is A-OK, our 6-step system for discovering who you are, what's important to you, what your strengths, passions, and purpose are. In that regard, I want to invite you to join me for my free 5-day workshop called How to Fall in Love with Your ADHD Brain. I'll be doing 3 live workshop trainings around this topic. I'm going to answer questions. I'm going to help coach you into creating your own individual plan. And because I know the importance of community in reducing shame around ADHD, exactly what Dr. Hallowell and I were just talking about, I am also opening a private Facebook group just for this workshop. So if this sounds like something you might be interested in, I hope you join me at tracyotsuka.com/I love my brain. Finally, if you like this episode with Dr. Hallowell, please let us know by leaving a review. Our goal is to change the conversation around ADHD, helping as many women as we possibly can learn how their amazing ADHD brains work so that they too may discover their strengths. And your reviews, they really help in that regard. So if you need anything at all, you can find it on my website at tracyotsuka.com. Thank you so much for listening, and I'll see you here next week. You've been listening to the ADHD for Smartass Women podcast. I'm your host, Tracy Otsuka, and we're available on iTunes, Stitcher, Spotify, and Google Podcasts. Not coincidentally, ADHD for Smartass Women, it's also the name of our free Facebook group. We're a totally smartass community of successful, ambitious women who share our ADHD wins, questions, and workarounds. Join us at tracyotsuka.com, where you can also find more information on our Your ADHD Brain is A-OK system. I spy a happier life for us, and I'll see you again next week.